Hello, and welcome to the Trinity Podcast, where it's our goal to help everyday people discover an extraordinary life with God. Today, I am joined by Tommy Carr, my dad, Tom Messer, and Daniel Riddick. And today, we're talking about the idea of generous giving. And because this idea can come with, some tough topics, let's break the ice a little bit and talk a little bit about how a time in your life that you might have spent more money than you were making, or when money was an issue for you.
So last week.
Christie, it's funny you say, you did a great job setting that up. It does come with tough topics. And it's difficult. Money's one of those things when you mention it in a public setting, you can kind of feel the air coming out of the room because everybody has their own money struggles. So I've said it in previous podcasts that Rhoda and I, for the first 5 years, every year we do our taxes, you'd get down there and put the amount in, and it goes, if you've entered this, please proceed directly to the bottom of the form. And I'd go, well, what does that mean? And it goes, well, you're below the federal poverty level. And so I love what the one preacher said, I'm not sure what's worse, the love of money or the lack of it. And so, so money's one of those things. And I can remember times to where, we're at the grocery store and the thing's going beep, 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 beep. And Rhoda was sitting there, who controls all of our household finance. She's like, stop. I'm like, what happened? And we haven't even got to the chips and the Cokes and the Debbies. She goes, that's all the money we have. So money's one of the things you've really got to get a good perspective on, and a real, I think, a spiritual foundational view of to handle it correctly, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when we, Jen and I had been married, living in a one-bedroom apartment. Finally, we're like, hey, we're going to buy a house. And of course, and this is good advice, generally speaking. Everybody's telling you, how, purchasing a home, best investment you can make, and all this kind of stuff. Well, we bought our home, right before the big real estate collapse in 2008.
That's brilliant.
So like at the early of 2007, whatever, if you go back and look at like a graph of the housing market, whatever the highest point on the mountain peak was in terms of value, right before it crashed, that's when we bought our house. And then 12 months later, I'm looking around like, hey, everybody told me this was going to be the best financial decision you've ever made. And it did not feel like that for quite a number.
You're in the dictionary looking up negative equity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, money, it is complicated. And it becomes one of those things that in the world we live in, and, it becomes one of the things that has a deep impact into every part of our life. And so we've got to get a handle on it. And
so let me just follow up on that, though. So
it did work. It did work out in the end, right?
Seemed like a good decision. Felt like a bad decision.
Yeah.
Ended up being a great decision
because we held on to it.
Yeah.
We moved. We ended up having it as a rental house, and fast forward, a decade later or so, and it
turned out good.
It turned out good. Yeah. At the time, it did not feel good.
So let me say something. I always struggle to just talk about stories that, when you're first married, everybody has their first marriage stories. Looking back on it now, I think, the two most awkward conversations to really have with your kids is obviously the conversation about sex and the conversation about money. And I think parents have a tendency to think, hey, we're doing a really good job talking about these things, because you're not unwilling to do it. It's just not natural to do. I think we end up catching more by what we see than by what we're taught, and when it comes to money, particularly. And when your mom and I got married, it never occurred to me that whatever they're going to pay me is going to be enough to live on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the truth is, that's true. You just have to adjust your standard of living to how much money you make. And the painful process is learning how to do that. And, I've told the story here many times about how, we would sometimes go to our car and search for change to put gas in the car just to be able to go to church, how can we buy groceries for $25 this week, and you learn. And part of that's really healthy, because on one hand, if you ever learn how to figure it out, when you finally get a little bit of money, you have a blueprint to do it. So I think everybody goes through that. I think our problem is that oftentimes we don't we want to view our finances in view of God in light of, hey, God, we need more. Not everything we have belongs to you, and we want to be obedient to you. We want to live as though you're the most important thing in our life. And I think that becomes a real struggle in managing finances.
Yeah. So last week, Patrick said to me, let's go over the budget in the family. And I would choose anything else.
Yeah.
I would go, scrub the grout in my bathroom.
Right.
Or, spend whatever I could to avoid that
Yeah.
topic. It's just I don't enjoy that topic. So let's talk about some advice that you'd give to somebody.
Did you get that from me or from your mom?
I think I got that from my mom. Does not, my skin began to crawl. But every relationship has, two different people, like some that are very, regimented about the finances and some that I don't even want to know. I just want to know if my card's going to get declined. Do I have enough money for that dress?
That's it. That's true.
So what advice would you give to someone who is struggling with their finances?
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a couple of. I think what Tommy said earlier is money is not as much a matter of rules, and I think there are probably some good rules for handling your finances as much it is a matter of perspective. And I think one of the big shifts that needs to happen is that you put it in its proper place. And what Pastor Tom just said is if you only have a perspective of it's this one thing in my life that I always need more of, inevitably the outcome of that is it becomes, an idol in your life. It becomes the thing that owns you. You don't own it, that you serve. When you realize that money is a resource, it's a tool, it's something we've been given, like all things in our life, to steward by God, then all of a sudden you begin to behave differently. You begin to behave differently with it, and you begin to view it differently as something that doesn't have to control you, but that you can control it, that you can use and you have influence over, and God gives you wisdom and opportunity to steward appropriately, both for your blessing and also the advancement of the kingdom of God. So I mean, I think the first thing that it becomes foundational before you get into tips and tricks on budgeting and all that, which are really helpful. I mean, at some point you do have to get to that, is to really begin to reshape kind of at a foundational level how we view our finances. And then I would say specifically that we're ready to put it in its place. And generally speaking, I'm not trying to paint with a broad brushstroke, but I mean, in our kind of Western modern world, and the church and the people in the church, we're just as susceptible to this. Generally speaking, the big problem we have is not what we know or don't know about money, or even, I think to your point, it's really funny, it's true, some of us are wired differently to how we think about money. I don't even think that's the big issue. I think the big issue is, for a lot of us, we have money in the wrong place in our life. And if we can get it situated rightly and biblically, a lot of those kind of tensions and problems begin to resolve themselves when we have it in the right place.
So Leslie Parrott, I agree with everything you said. I think there's a foundational argument. Leslie Parrott, great book, How to Save Your Marriage Before or After It Starts. They address really rapidly this idea of specified roles. Normally within a married couple, there's one that's better at household finance. They're just more in tune with it. They're more disciplined. And the other one's, is my credit card going to be declined? Do I have enough in the bank? Can I get what I want to do? Savers and spenders. But even deeper than that, thinkers and visionaries. So I can look at visionary ideas of money. Hey, if we can get this much, we can do this. Rhoda sees nuts and bolts. So in the specified role, if I'm talking to a couple that says we're having financial trouble, you ask one question: well, who's better at handling household finance? And you've got to get past the gender idea of the man always handles the finances. Sometimes a female is just better at household finance. Doesn't mean he can't lead in the area, just he's not going to be the nuts and bolt guy. So inside of that, if both of them look at each other and they go, we're both bad with money, then you got to take it to a different level and get them to a financial professional that can help get disciplines in their life. So I think there's a pragmatic way you look at it and say, listen, it may be there's nobody in the relationship that's able to handle the finances, or the person that is best equipped to handle it is being stifled and squelched on it. In our marriage, I thought, well, I'm going to handle all this. And Rhoda was just better at it. And so once she started going, hey, have you thought of this? I'm like, that's a great idea. So I'm finally like, I'll go make it. And I'm going to, big ideas, come see me. If not, I was making a joke, and I don't mean to pick on her, but it's okay. So we were just happened to be out to eat with Daniel and the crew. And I just paid for something at Mojo's. And my phone goes, bzzz. And I went, well, what is that? And she goes, hey, I see you're at Mojo's. Do you know how much tip you're going to be leaving today? I'm like, wow. And it's not that she's controlling, but she gets part of her value within the marriage from the ability to handle the finances. So I think if a couple came to me and said, hey, we're having financial troubles, let's dig down to the ontological root of maybe there's an issue.
You know, one more thing, Tommy. I think at a surface level, and I mean, I have thought this so many times in my life at points, we think I'm having money problems, and the big problem is how much money I have. And I think a lot of people, that's kind of the whole framework for how they view money. The big problem in my life is I don't have enough of it. And if I had more, all of my problems would be resolved. And by and large, you can have major money problems with a little bit of money in the bank account, and you can have major money problems with a lot of money in the bank account, because it's not about the amount that you have. That may be a factor, and there's it's a part of the equation, but it's what Tommy just talked about. Usually it's about management and priority and perspective and principle, not about, whether you've got, $20,000 or $200,000, sitting in your checking account. Normally that just scales up the intensity of whatever kind of challenge you're facing.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I think with married couples, finding your role and finding a system that works for your family to manage your money is really critical. It doesn't have to be a point of tension. And the more you can get on the same page, I think it's critical. I think underneath all this is I think we really forget that, in Deuteronomy, God reminds Moses to tell the people that it's the Lord that gives you power to get wealth. And, we sometimes even look at giving through the lens of, I'm going to give God my money. Well, you don't give God your money. You give God his money. It's all his. And it's not, he has a portion, you have the rest. It all belongs to him. And probably in reality, because he's a creator and a designer, he's created and designed and entrusted you with a capacity for money based on what he thinks he can trust you with. And our responsibility is to take that, and the test is we test him. We say, hey, this is how much we trust you by the way that we manage it. So I think overall the principle is that we don't have enough of a God-saturated view about parenting, about marriage, about money and finances. We have our view, and we kind of want to invite God into the little bit of our life that we're willing to give God. And I think what God's trying to do is say, hey, wait a minute, I want to take over everything, and I want to saturate your entire life with it. And the more you learn how to do that, the more you find, it's an incredible journey to see what God can do in your life when you put him first. And I think, even in the context of marriage and family, you all have experienced that. The great thing is when you can get to agreement with your spouse about what are our goals, what do we really want our life to look at, what kind of legacy do we want to leave our kids, what kind of investment do we want to make in the kingdom of God, and then you start working towards that. That becomes a fun objective, and it begins to shape everything the way you do with your finances.
Yeah, I'll usually end up there pretty quickly. There's two ideas we have trouble in our marriage in finances: goals and roles. What are your goals and what are your roles? And if he tries to involve you in his role, it's going to frustrate you. And so like Rhoda will go, hey, do you want to look? I'm like, no, I really don't, because this is not going to end up well, because you're going to look at it differently, more detailed. I'm the helicopter finance. You're the boots on the ground. And if you try to get the helicopter guy in the boots, it's going to be a real frustration. Yeah. So
that's good. Yeah. I'm always like, just tell me what I can do.
That's it.
So we kind of talked a little bit about this already, but maybe there's a few more just practical tips or principles that you use in your family or with your spouse to manage your money or save your money or handle it the best way.
Well, so I mean, I'll talk a little bit about what your mom and I do. It's, you know, and we are very different. Like I know where every single dollar is, and it's very intuitive to me to be that way. I probably know where every single dollar of yours is.
My own personal money, not
yeah.
I want to dig in that I'm just kidding.
and Michael's always asking me. I mean, I enjoy helping and being engaged in that. Here's the thing that I found with us, and this is probably the best practical advice. I have numbers of bank accounts. And I have, for example, I have a bank account that the only thing that goes in there is the money that covers all of we have to pay these bills every month. And nobody has access to spend money out of that account. There's no debit cards, it just goes in there, and my bills are automatically set up. And so I have this great comfort because, hey, we may blow money over here, but making a bad decision over here is not going to affect if the mortgage is paid, if the insurance gets paid, if it's any bill that we have, it's allocated, set aside, and it's in a bill paying account. And then our spending money, we both have, we have household expenses and personal expenses. And what we've just historically done is we just, every week, mom gets her money, I get mine. And, I mean, truthfully, if she uses up hers, I'm going to give her more. I never go over them. I'm going to say never. The only ways I would ever go over is if I give money to the kids or grandkids, but I mean, I have a cushion in my life to do that. But so we just have a little practical system. And, the great thing is she can't behave in a way that's going to create stress for me. I can't behave in a way that's going to create stress for her. And every once in a while she'll say, "Oh, how much money do we have?" I said, "Well, how much money do we have to spend, or how much money do we have, total?" But you just get a system, and it works. And I think communications, being clear about what you're trying to accomplish, and then communicating about it, and then not trying to control. You can't use money as a weapon to control the other person, or try to manage an outcome that's not agreed upon.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, I think the communication and the those outcomes that you agree upon are really important, especially in the context of a relationship like a marriage. And whether you're an individual, a single adult, or married, I think coming to some kind of rock solid like stakes in the ground. Hey, these things are going to be, they're going to be certain for us. Before we do anything else, we're going to do this. We're going to set aside a tithe. We're going to pay our bills. In other words, the more you can kind of nail down and name those specific kind of non-negotiables, then all of a sudden it really sets you up as much as is possible for success when you have what I would call the variable, because the main things are taken care of. Scott Rideout, he would use this phrase all the time, and it really helps, especially now kind of so everybody's banking and money management is all digital and electronic. He would always kind of say, hey, you should automate the important. In other words, the things that are significant in your life, they should not be wrestling decisions you're having to make every single month. At some point, you've made the decision, you've locked it in, you're going to move forward, and then communicating about that with your spouse or with those who are in your life that are involved or impacted by your finances is so critical. And again, figuring out how to communicate about it in the right way, to everybody's point, it's like, yeah, it may not be, hey, saddle up and take a look at this spreadsheet. That may not be the communication, but having a conversation where everybody is involved in the discussion, I do think is important at a fundamental level. And I've had to figure that out in our relationship on how to talk with Jen about money, because she's not a detailed person in our finances at all, but she's not a spender either, and she quickly will feel financial pressure that I never feel, and so I kind of hold a lot of the information. She sometimes feels a lot of the responsibility. I've had you know, I've said something to her, you know, in times past where it's like, hey, we need to kind of watch our spending. And I'm just kind of saying generally, like, hey,
She's
you
like,
know,
That's very
yeah, you know,
personal.
saying generally,
Yeah.
you know, and then it's like the next week I'm like, well, what kind of toilet paper did we buy? And she's like, oh, I got this cheap stuff. You know, I know we're trying to cut back. And I'm just like, that's not what I'm talking about. You know,
That's
I mean,
definitely not what you're
I
talking
mean,
about.
I mean something. She interprets it one way. And so I do think in a relationship, you have to learn how to talk about money in ways that the other indivial can
Here's a
respond
great
to.
goal. You know, it's funny. Somebody said to me the other day, they said, man, I went to an event on campus with a bunch of people at, and I was introducing myself to people, and they were like, man, I didn't know you ever got around people. You know, I thought you were so busy. I'm like, well, actually, this is what I really enjoy doing. And one thing that I really enjoy doing is helping couples that have financial issues just kind of talk them through and help them set up budgets. And it's really such a simple thing, but it's so foundational in the marriage process. You know, if every couple would start out this way, 10, 10, 80, give 10% of your money, save 10% of your money, live on 80%. If you can master that, if you can get that as an embedded principle, whenever you're inevitably going to make more money. Everybody does. I mean, I hardly know anybody that hasn't over time started to make more money. Well, then three things actually happen to you. If you get on a budget when you make more money, you'll be able to give more, save more, and increase your standard of living. So you want to increase your standard of giving, increase your standard of living, and increase your capacity for financial security in your future. And if you start with 10, 10, 80, and see, everybody says, well, you're not going to spend X amount of dollars. Don't think about it in terms of percentage. And if you do that, you've set yourself up for really long-term success with your money, and it reduces both stress and conflict. You know, internal stress that you feel, and then conflict that you can have in your relationship.
Really good. Nothing to add. I mean, I just think the communication of money is so important within a marriage.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the key things. The struggle sometimes isn't over the lack of it or the way, it's just the way they argue about it, the way they communicate about it. So it's like Tom just described himself. He likes knowing where every dollar's going. So he's like the air traffic controller of finances in the Messer house. He knows where every airplane is, and he knows when they should arrive. You're going to walk in there and go, I don't care.
Right.
Just the plane I'm on, are we still flying? And so I think the way and the wisdom, like with Jen or with Lisa or with Rhoda, if you over-involve somebody in finances, it's going to really frustrate them. And if you isolate them, it's going to be bad for the relationship. So you have to find the balance at which level, how much information, how much detail, make sure you're on goals, make sure you have the same type of fixtures in the marriage that work. So that's a big point for me.
So, Dad, you were just talking about the 10-10-80 rule. I like that. And I liked when you said that we're not really giving our money, we're giving God's money. So talk about how you got to a place where giving was important and it was something in your family that you established.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really probably one of my most passionate subjects to talk about and to live out. You know, I can vividly remember. So when I came to Trinity in 1982, the church had gone through bankruptcy in the 70s, and it had been really a traumatic, kind of defining historical moment in the history of the church. And, you know, they were trying to dig out from underneath this debt. Well, they'd made some really good, solid decisions. That's a great story. Jerry Falwell had come here and really helped the church figure out how to move into generosity. And so in 82, we had these stewardship banquets, and the church established this hey, everybody should be tithing, and we want you to give above the tithe, even if it's $1. And I remember sitting at the first stewardship banquet that I was ever at, and I was, you know, in my mind, I was calculating out, literally, I was drawing it on a piece of paper while we were sitting in a stewardship banquet, and I'm like, okay, so 10% of my money is this, and I thought, okay, if I gave $5 a week, but I only get paid every other week, so that'd be $10 every 2 weeks, which, I mean, I think about that now, $10 every 2 weeks, that was going to be $260. And that seemed like a mountain's worth of money to me at the time. And I made, and your mom and I talked about it, but we made collectively together a conscious decision. We were going to do two things. We were always going to tithe. Well, three things. We were always going to tithe. We were always going to give above our tithe, even if it was $1. And we were going to increase our giving every year. That was in 1982. 40 years later, we have increased our giving every year for 40 years. Now, sometimes it's just been dollar amount increase. Sometimes it's been percentage amount increase. But we just made that decision, and we've never missed out because we never lived off the money that we had already committed to give. And you know, the way I do it is real simple. Is this? Is I set if I get an increase in pay or an increase in money, I always give the increase of money at a higher percentage than what I currently give at now. So I'm always increasing my standard of giving because I give new money at a higher rate. Now, I just made that decision in 1982, and I'll connect the dot for you. So, you know, I started thinking about retirement I started thinking about finances long term when I realized, hey, I'm going to have 3 kids in college at one time. And you've lived through this. Oh, yeah. You haven't yet. You're getting ready to, and you're going to have to live through it too.
But we don't want you to worry about it.
You and Patrick
No, I'm not gonna.
and Gordon and Carrie and me and Mom are going to worry about all that together. But no, so it became a real issue. And so I thought, man, there's some things I have to be doing. And so I bought some houses just primarily as investments to help supplement what would be a retirement. And about the same time, we went through the same experience. Now I did it with investment property. And I remember laying in bed at night stressed over, man, the property values have gone down and the rents are suppressed. And I was subsidizing people to live in houses that I owned in order to make the mortgage payments. And, the great comfort in my life was this, that knowing that I had really honestly put God first in everything, and even those houses didn't belong to me, they belonged to Him. And, I remember God just giving me peace. Hey, look, this is part of the process. And the great lesson was I give a lot of advice to people about how they handle investment money. And not every investment you make works out the way you want it to work out. Sometimes you go through hard times, and you have to learn lessons through that. And now I look back at that, and it's a drop. I mean, I kind of laugh. It wasn't that big a deal,
right?
But I promise you, underlying on that was the fact that God was being honored in my finances. You take care of the things that belong to God, God will take care of the things that belong to you. And I just believe that. I mean, I've lived that out in my life, and I've seen it to be true.
Yeah, I would echo everything he said. The priority of giving, like first 5 years we were below the poverty level. We still gave faithfully to the church. And I'm thinking, man, I'm really giving. And it was such a small amount to look back at what we were giving. But even during the rougher financial periods, we just made a priority of giving to the Lord and giving to the church and giving to those that the Lord commanded. And I think that priority of giving, I think the Lord allows some difficult times to come into people's lives so He can see what your commitment to Him is. And I think it would have been easy. I made a joke that we used to drive down along the river, down where you live. We used to drive along the river and look at these big old people's houses, and we'd be like, wow, those are beautiful homes. And Rhoda would go, man, what do you think they do for a living? And I'm like, they don't tithe. And I was just this.
Or they did.
And Rhoda's like, well, we're going to be faithful because it's all of God's money. And I'm like, you're right. And we were just faithful. And then all of a sudden, in these little incremental spots, God blesses. And you keep being more faithful. And then He blesses and you be more faithful. And as long as you keep your mind that it's His money, and that's the way we're going to give. I always tell young couples, start giving early. It's hard to start giving later. Start making it the priority of your budget as soon as you get married, and God will bless. His word is true. He promises it. So claim it and prove Him.
Do you feel, Daniel, this would be interesting because you've kind of come into it in a little different way than I did. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, but a little different. Do you feel a pressure to set an example, even though people may never say, "Hey, Daniel, how
Yeah.
much money do you
Yeah,
give?"
yeah.
But do you feel that pressure to set an example about the way you handle your money, because you know deep down, I mean, it gives you authority to teach, and
Right.
But does that enter into your thinking at all?
Well, I think like all things, yes, at a certain level, I would say that's probably not the most healthy foundational. Hey, I'm doing this because I feel guilty about it. But yeah, there should be.
It worked in the 80s.
Here's the bottom line when it comes to this conversation is that this is a gospel issue. In other words, if Christ has really changed us from the inside out, then there are evident, tangible, realities of this. And so if we've been authentically changed and we're going to walk with integrity in the message of Jesus, then this is one of those implications. And absolutely, to call people into something that you're not willing to do yourself is the baseline definition of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
But then I think the right motivation is to say, hey, listen, if my faith is real, then it means something. And I have found in my own way of thinking and in conversation with others, everybody is great with the idea of generosity. In other words, like
Nobody thinks
it's bad. Yeah. If you say, hey,
Yeah.
do you want to be a generous person? Absolutely. Do you think generosity is a good idea? Yes, we need more of it. Do you think the scripture, points us toward a lifestyle? Not a question in the mind. What does that look like? And then that's where everything starts getting kind of squirrely because it's like, hey, we don't really, and at some point, if our faith is real, then it means something. And there are real implications kind of on our life, our relationships, including our finances. And somebody said to me one time, and it was both equally convicting but also incredibly practical. They said, I can probably tell you the significant priorities of your life if you would just give me quick access to 1 week of your calendar and 1 week of your bank account.
Yeah.
And they said, you don't have to tell me anything. If I could just see your calendar, kind of where you went, what you did, and if I could look at your bank account, I could quickly tell you what the significant priorities in your life are. And by and large, that's true. How I'm using my time, how I'm using my talent, how I'm using my treasure reflect what is real in my life. But I do think it is something that you grow into, that you have to come to a place where you determine, like so many other things, hey, this is either going to be real or it's not. And if it's real, then it means something for us.
I'll say that's a great answer, and I love hearing you process it out. One thing I've tried to keep in mind, and I think you answered it this way, but I think there's an opportunity for us to say, hey, I want you to follow me as I follow Jesus. Mm-hmm. So I want to think about the way that I follow Jesus is the way I want other people to follow Jesus. And that includes the way that I handle my money and not just generous in giving, but mm-hmm. in the way I handle it, make good financial decisions, all that. I think that's an incredibly important thing. When it comes to giving, so we kind of touch on this a little bit, but the other side of it is the greed side. And, you can have money and have money sickness, greed, and you can have no money and have money sickness. It's not, you said what? It's not the love of money, it's the lack of money.
Yeah, it's not the love of money.
So this love of money thing. The three things that really are woven into the teaching of the Bible is we give because it helps us to remember this came from somewhere. God's blessed me. Memory's important. Mm-hmm. So the act of giving is actually it's grooving that memory. It's connecting in your memory. It's creating a memory trace. I didn't earn this. God gave this to me, right? It's to accomplish things in generosity that nothing else can do. There's woven into the moral fabric of the universe generosity principles. An example of that is if you giving to the poor is lending to the Lord, and He will repay. God's not going to be a debtor to anybody. So when you're generous, think generosity towards poverty issues and the poor, God's saying, hey, I'm not going to let you give to me and me not take care of you. So it's woven in the fabric of generosity, memory generosity. But then covenant. And covenant is, He says in Deuteronomy that you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who give you the power to get wealth, that He may confirm His covenant that He swore to your fathers. And this whole idea of covenant is, I'm actually engaged in life in a way, relationship with God, and in a covenant with people. And that's why church membership and church really matters. It matters if you show up. It matters if you serve. It matters if you give. And Sunday I walked out of a service and was heading to where we greet guests, and they were just finishing up in here. And it's funny, 3 or 4 people followed me because they really wanted to talk to me. And I said, yeah, come on, I'm going to slip down to the plaza. I'm happy to talk with you. And I walked over and dropped my tithe envelope in the offering plate, and every one of them reaches into their wallet.
Oh, if you're going to give, I'm going to give.
Pulls money out and puts it in because
So that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I didn't do that for that reason, but I was going to check on. And then they wanted to engage me in conversation, but I could tell what they sensed was, hey, yeah, that we actually have. I don't know where all that money's going to go, but we have a responsibility to be part of whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. And I'm really glad that I know that we help people pay their electric bill because they had catastrophic things happen in their life, or we sow into people that are going through hardships, or we're helping people in ways that they wouldn't be able to survive without the church coming alongside them. So that when you do that, you're living for something way bigger than you. You're involved in something. You say, man, I'm so glad I'm a part of it. And I mean, in our case, we get paid, but I may never need benevolent money from the church. Doesn't matter. And I would have a hard time figuring out who to give my money to if it wasn't done through an organization like this. So it's just a great way to be involved in the.
I think ultimately, I love everything you said and the way you're bringing money to a church to give, and we're meeting needs in people's lives. And Paul made this comment, like those things that you've seen and heard may do those. So I think there's a leadership principle. But I think ultimately the way you handle your money ultimately reflects what you think of God. And do you trust Him with your finances? Do you trust Him? The New Testament's funny. Out of the 30-something parables, 16 are about money. There's 500 verses on faith, 500 verses on prayer, over 2,000 on money. So God knows money's going to be an issue in our heart. So what you think of your Heavenly Father is reflected by the way you use your money. We went on a cruise. I've shared it in here before. So we go on this cruise ship, and I'm trying to prep my kids, right? The night before we get off the boat, I'm like, hey, Christopher, when you get off the boat at that dock, there's going to be all these little kids there. And they're going to be like, dollar, give me a dollar, give me a dollar. They'll put stuff on your hands, give me a dollar, give me a dollar. We get up the next morning, get dressed. They're in a separate, we have a 2-room side by side. He comes out and his pockets are just stuffed with money. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, every dollar I have's in my pockets. I'm like, what are you going to do? He's, they need it more than I do. And I'm like, but if you give all your dollars away, you won't have any more money. And he goes, you will. The idea is, I can't outgive my God. And if I really have ultimate trust in Him, why am I stressing about money? It is a reflection on what I think about God.
Do you remember going to Mexico when you were kids? Do you remember what happened at McDonald's down there?
The little boy was eating ketchup out of it. That was his lunch, was the ketchup out of the ketchup.
What'd your mom do?
She was crying.
So she goes out and gives him her food. And,
Yeah.
It is, but, and those seem so anecdotal. And, it seems anecdotal that we would send, okay, we're going to send $200 a month or $500 a month to a missionary. What does that really do? I mean, you think about, man, what is it? What is that? How does that? I mean, the needs are so great. But if you break down into those individual stories, those people are doing incredible things to help people who are marginalized in many ways, could be oppressed, whatever, forgotten, poor, however you want to say it. And you're sowing into bringing about gospel healing to a world that's broken and coming apart at the seams without Jesus. And so I think sometimes we just fail to realize, I'm not saying this about our church, I'm saying this about every single church, I'm saying about every worthy Christian cause in the world, is that God says, hey, you can sow your money. Now, maybe giving dollar bills to a kid at the end of the plank on a cruise ship is not going to, but you're sowing your money to bring healing to a world that is broken and coming apart because of sin. And Jesus said you ought to tithe, but you ought to do more than that because of the justice of God and the love of God. That ought to pull us in to trying to solve problems that are bigger than us by using our money to be able to do that.
Yeah, one of my favorite, y'all know I love Billy Sunday. I just love that revivalism. Yeah. So he said from the pulpit one day, he said, show me a man that has no money and I'll tell you he's poor. Show me a man that has only money and I'll tell you he's poor still. So money is not the definer of that.
Yeah. It's interesting. You can give, philanthropically and generously without having a heart for giving and without a changed heart.
It can be just a transaction.
But you cannot have a heart that's been changed and not give. In other words, you can give without the changed heart, but you cannot have a changed heart and not give.
That's good thought.
And I think that's where we've really, again, if we kind of begin the conversation from the inside out, it moves, and it's something that we have to grow into. It is a discipline of the Christian life, like everything. It's something we mature into and grow into, and over a period of time. But at some point, the things that you did think deeply about in a good way and wrestle with, you get 20 years down the road, and they've just become normal, natural parts of your life, and that's the way it should be as we kind of grow in our giving.
That's good, Daniel.
It's great. It's a great conversation. I think it's a good way to wrap up. And we're going to talk more about this on Sunday, right? So come to church on Sunday. Thank you for tuning in to the Trinity Podcast, and we'll see you next week.